All right, it's everybody's favorite day of the week. It's Friday, so of course everybody enjoys Fridays, but I'd like to think that it's also your favorite day of the week because of the Morning Pitt Mailbag, which is what we do every Friday on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the first week of training camp. There was Pitt basketball to see and talk about and write about last night, so we had a lot of coverage of that. And, yeah, there's just a lot going on, but I hope you didn't think that we would skip on the Morning Pitt Mailbag. We definitely did not, will not. And this will be a standard thing every Friday. We'll have the mailbag, unless they have a Thursday night game, but I don't think they have one this year. So no Thursday night game means they're not going to interfere with our Friday Morning Pitt Mailbag. So we got great questions this week. Got some football questions. Got a basketball question or two in there. So we got a lot to cover. Let's dive into it here on the Morning Pitt. It's the Morning Pitt Mailbag, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, every Friday here on the Morning Pitt, we do the Morning Pitt Mailbag where we take questions from the Pitt fans at Panther-Lair.com. See the website below, Panther-Lair.com. It's a Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt transfer portal, Pitt everything we covered at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans all day, every day about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. And throughout the week, we take questions from Pitt fans. We put up a thread on Tuesdays that says, hey, post your questions for the mailbag. People post questions throughout the week. We answer as many as we can right here on the Friday edition of the Morning Pitt Mailbag here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and make sure you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You won't miss any of our Pitt video content. Let's jump into the questions here, get things started. First one is from Potter County native, says, do you foresee any surprises in this year's starting 22 as we had last year with Eli Holstein coming out and amazing us all? Probably nothing quite that big unless the Mason Heinschel hype train truly leaves the station and gets crazy and somehow he unseats Eli Holstein, which I don't think is going to happen. Like, I mean, it's a non-zero chance because there's a non-zero chance of everything happening. I don't think it's going to happen that Mason Heinschel would unseat Eli Holstein, and that would probably be the only thing that would be a seismic surprise on the level of Eli Holstein being the starter last season, because we're talking about the quarterback position. I think, there's a possibility on the offensive line. I mean, we've talked about the variety of combinations they could roll out there. I think we're all fairly confident about Lyndon Cooper at center and Ryan Barrett right tackle. B.J. Williams is probably in pretty solid spot at right guard. And so it's really those two left spots, maybe, and I don't necessarily see this happening, but maybe one of those guys could unseat B.J. Williams, and that would be a surprise starter. I think as you go out there to start the season. On the defensive side, I don't think we have a real locked-in idea of what the depth chart's going to look like at defensive end and defensive tackle, so there's probably not many surprises there. It would be a huge shocker if somebody unseated one of the presumed starters at linebacker. I don't think Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles are in any real jeopardy, but who knows? Everybody raves about Jeremiah Marcelin, so potentially could unseat Braylon Lovelace. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Marcelin's just going to play a lot. I think, you'll have Lewis, Lovelace, and Biles as your starters, and then Marcelin and Cam Lindsey and maybe even Jaden Bonsu, the transfer from Ohio State, will all get on the field a decent amount during the season. I think at cornerback, there's a possibility Shadarian Harrison could sort of surprise and unseat either Tamon Lynam or Rashad Battle. Either way, there again, all three of those guys are going to play a lot. So starter or not starter, I think those guys we'll see them all on the field. But that would be a bit of a surprise, I think, if Harrison unseated one of the seniors. At safety, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Cruz Brookins and Javon McIntyre. So one of those guys not starting would be a surprise, but I'm not sure. I don't see a real likelihood of that happening. So I don't think you'll have a big surprise like we had last year with Eli Holstein taking over for Nate Yarnell. But again, there's a non-zero chance with some of those spots. Pocono Panther says, Chris, with the Penn State debacle when Panarduzzi elected to kick a field goal from the 1, and he did likewise in the bowl game versus Toledo, do you think he'll be more aggressive in fourth down situations? Let's face it, Caleb Junko, although improved, still seems inconsistent, and the field goal kicking left a lot to be desired in the spring. The Penn State game was 6 years ago. right? And the Toledo game was the most recent game that Pitt has played. Different situations, different circumstances, bad decisions all around, wrong decisions, mistakes all around, but different kinds of situations. I don't know if one really relates to the other in terms of going forward on fourth down. And I think if you look on a game-to-game basis of fourth down decisions, very few are going to mimic what the situations were in that Penn State game in 2019 and the Toledo game, 8 months ago. You're not going to have those. Those were, again, unique end of game situations. They were each unique from each other. And I think they're unique from what you'll face on a week-to-week basis. I kind of looked back, and I mean, this is just jotting it down on the back of an envelope type of thing. And I think Pitt went for it on about 20% of their fourth downs last year. Now, that's a terrible stat to reference because I think if you're going to talk about fourth down attempts, you need to have a whole lot more context than that. What side of the field? I think you need to narrow it down to where they were on the field, not just opponent territory or your territory, but were you, had you gotten past your own 40? So I guess you would start there. Like, what's the barometer on, when you should go for it on fourth down? Because there's the yard line and then there's the distance, right? So you could be at your opponent's 42 facing 4th and 12, right? Or you could be at your own 37 or your own 42 facing 4th and 1. And one of those is a much more likely and good call to go for it than the other, even though one you're, across the side of the field. So I think you would have to chart all the fourth downs they faced, and I haven't done this. It's one of the things I don't have a spreadsheet for, but maybe I will at some point. I mean, hell, I have a spreadsheet charting every time they've called heads or tails and won the coin toss, lost the coin toss, and the impact that's had. So I keep a lot of spreadsheets. But one day we should sit down and chart like where they were on the field, the distance they were facing, the decision that they made. I think anecdotally, just as I think of it off the top of my head, I feel like in the last few years, Pat Narduzzi has been more aggressive about going for it on fourth down. When he's gotten across his own 40, if it's a 4th and 3 or less, it seems to me he's more aggressive about it and more likely to go for it. I don't think the Penn State game in 2019 or the bowl game against Toledo, since again, it was the most recent game they played, I don't think those changed his perspective. I think he just, while there's often a sentiment that Narduzzi is, stuck in the past and hasn't adapted to modern football, I think he does have an understanding that going forward on fourth down is a good decision more often than we used to think. And so I think he has been more aggressive with that. He's gone for it more on fourth downs. Like I say, on a very raw number scale, Pitt has, last year they went for it on about 20% of their fourth downs. I think they had 21 fourth down attempts and they had 24 field goal attempts, right? So and then like 50 some punts. And so you kind of add that all together, you get about 100 or so fourth downs, assuming all the punts and field goals were on fourth down. And so 21 fourth down attempts is about 20%. That seems to me to be relatively aggressive. It's not one of the crazier numbers. Oh, they go for it on 50% of their fourth downs or something. But I mean, a lot of times the down and distance or the distance and the yard line are not going to allow you to be that aggressive. So we would probably have to consider all the factors: distance, yard line, situation in the game, right? Because even then, that's going to affect it sometimes. And affect whether it's a good decision or what you do. So, do I think he'll be more aggressive in fourth down situations going forward? My guess is no. I think he'll probably continue what I perceive to be a trend toward being more aggressive over the last few years. I think he'll stay in that direction. NC Panther 99 says, without winning the ACC championship, if Pitt got into the ACC championship game with, say, a close loss to Clemson and a regular season close loss to Notre Dame, would that get Pitt into the college football playoffs with 2 losses of less than 7 points? I would have to think yes. You'd be going into the ACC championship game at 11-1, right? Under this scenario. And your only loss would be to Notre Dame, who is presumably going to be, either in the playoff or in contention for a playoff spot. I think they're one of the schools you sort of assume will be there. You would have lost, and so your 2 losses in this scenario by less than a touchdown each would be to playoff teams. Clemson as the ACC champion going to the playoffs, and Notre Dame probably going to the playoffs. So I would think, yeah, you would get an at-large spot. You would probably be, look, if you're 11-1 going into the ACC championship game, you're going to be a top 12 team. And if you lose in the ACC championship game to Clemson by less than a touchdown, you're probably not going to fall all that far. So I would say, yes, under this specific scenario, 11-1 in the regular season with a loss to Notre Dame by less than 7 points, and then a loss to Clemson in the ACC title game, again by less than 7 points, yeah, that gets you in. But there's a whole lot, there are obviously a whole lot of ifs in that scenario, and a lot of situations that I don't know if it's all gonna work out that way. But in your very specific scenario, yeah, I think they get in. Jay Leisinger says, what do you think are the biggest swing games that will make the difference between a potential playoff season and just another 8-win year? I'm assuming 10 wins gets us in, so we would have to win one of Notre Dame, Miami, Louisville. I'm going to say that we have a few grenades on the schedule this year since we have to play on the road at West Virginia, Florida State, Syracuse, Stanford, and Georgia Tech, which I would feel better about being wins if they were home. So what's the question? Swing games. It's so hard for me to sit back and say, well, this is going to be one of the key games, because like you look down the schedule, right? Like I would assume you would not say Boston College at home is one of those key games. But the reality is Panarduzzi's like 1-3 against Boston College. Now, the only time he beat Boston College was when Pitt went 3-9. You know what I mean? Like better Pitt teams lost to Boston College. They lost in 2019. They lost in 2020. They lost last year. So it's hard for me to sit back and say, if they can beat Louisville, they're going to have a real chance. When the next week they've got Boston College, and that should be a game that Pitt can consistently win, and they haven't. So it's hard for me to then say, if they can, I'll tell you a key game. They got to beat NC State at home. And the reality is they're playing Syracuse on the road the game before that, the week before that, and they've lost to Syracuse under Panther-Lair. They lost in 2017. They lost in 2023, arguably one of the ugliest games of the Narduzzi era. I was actually thinking about this the other day. That game at Yankee Stadium was maybe one of the worst games of the Narduzzi era. Like worse than some of the ugly blowouts. That 51-6 game against Penn State in 2018, the Notre Dame game in 2023, the Notre Dame game in 2020, like the UCF game in 2018 that was just an absolute embarrassment. Like they've had some brutal losses, some ugly losses. I don't know if any were worse than that game at Yankee Stadium in 2023. So it's hard for me to pinpoint like, oh, this is a swing game, that's a swing game, when I can't sit back and just assume wins. I think you're right that like West Virginia on the road, Georgia Tech on the road, Stanford on the road, that's challenging. I mean, I think, like, okay, let's say they take care of business, all right? Let's say they beat Duquesne, Central Michigan. Let's say they go down and beat West Virginia. Let's say Boston College and Syracuse are games they win, and Stanford is a game they win. Let's say they go to Georgia Tech and win. You're looking at some of the ones you mentioned: Miami, Notre Dame, NC State, Florida State, Louisville. I think if you can get out of September at 4-0, which would mean beating Duquesne, Central Michigan, West Virginia on the road, and Louisville at home, you're going to be giving yourself a good shot. I think West Virginia on the road and I think Louisville at home are going to be two really tough games. So if you can get out of September at 4-0, that's the first step. And obviously, every game is the next step toward trying to build that resume that you're talking about. But like that's the first like benchmark for me. Is can you get past those 4 games? Because then you get in October, and you've got 4 games in October: Boston College at home, Florida State and Syracuse on the road, NC State at home. And then that home stretch: Stanford, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, Miami. I mean, I do look at this as 3 separate sections of the schedule, where, the last 2 games of September are going to be real challenges. October might not be all that tough. Boston College and Syracuse, I'm not buying in on Syracuse, and I'm not going to buy in on Syracuse unless they get to that game and they're like 6-0 also. Florida State, on the road, like that's tough, but we got to actually see and believe that they're going to be better than they were a year ago. And then NC State is always a pain in the butt, but if you can get to that point and you're still winning and you're like 7-0, 6-1 or something going into that NC State game, you're going to have a chance to make a lot of noise. And then you get to November. Stanford on the road, Notre Dame at home, Georgia Tech on the road, Miami at home. Like, that's a stretch to give you an opportunity to prove yourself and close out the season. So it's hard for me to say there are like swing games. I think you look at each section of the schedule and how it kind of stacks up and what Pitt needs to do in each section of the schedule to keep building. The path is laid out there. I kind of like how this schedule is laid out. I kind of like the order of the games and home and the way and all that stuff. And if they can get through it, they'll have proven themselves in some challenging environments. At West Virginia, at Florida State, Notre Dame at home, Louisville at home. They'll be proven. They'll be tested if they can get through this schedule with 2 or 3 losses or 1 or whatever. Let's see. We had a basketball question here. TPFKA_JD says, any early opinion on Makari Moore? If they don't add any other guards, do the coaches feel he's ready to log backup minutes at the point? So, we're taping this Thursday night. Just got back from the Peterson Event Center watching the Pitt basketball team practice. Makari Moore is interesting. I think he looks, I think Jeff Capel said he'd been a pleasant surprise, and I think he looks pretty good. I think he's got a lot of potential. I don't know if you're ready to slot him into the backup point guard role just yet, but somebody's going to have to work there unless they bring in Damian Dunn, which I think is still a possibility. Jeff Capel talked about it being a possibility last night. I think Brandon Cummings could potentially be your backup point guard. I tell you, the freshmen, there are a couple freshmen that really stood out to me last night. Amari Witherspoon really stood out. I think he looks like he's going to bring a fun energy to the court. It's fun to watch him play. And then Kieran Mullen, the freshman big. I mean, he was impressive. One of the more impressive guys at that open practice last night, at least in terms of guys you didn't expect to necessarily be impressed by. He stood out. So keep an eye on a few of those guys. Makari Moore, his role, he's obviously going to get more minutes if Damian Dunn doesn't get approved for an extra year. But if Dunn comes back, which it seems like the coaches are optimistic that he will, then that's going to cut into the minutes for a guy like Makari Moore. Let's see. A couple more here we'll get through real quick. Pitt 4444 says the biggest question mark in this defense is the defensive end position. There appears to be more talent and depth at the tackle position. And while the tackles don't have the ideal size to play defensive end, why not move one of them over to give it a try? I'd like to have my 4 best linemen on the field, and maybe one of the tackles has enough speed to play end. You don't need to be 6'4" to play the position. That's an interesting idea. I don't really see any of those guys really being built for that spot. And while it is the biggest question mark is defensive end, I'm not sure that moving a tackle there answers the question any better than the transfers that they brought in and the guys they've recruited do. That is the biggest question mark on the team, or maybe on the team, but certainly on the defense. But they brought in some guys that the coaches seem pretty optimistic about. I think they like how Blaine Spires and Joey Zielinski and Jaden Moore fit in. And I think they're optimistic about how those guys are going to be able to perform this year. So, and I think they also like the strength and depth they have at defensive tackle. So I don't see that move happening. I don't know if I see a defensive tackle who would really make that move well. I think you'd have to do some body changes, lose weight, and that kind of thing, which you wouldn't want to do at this point. Maybe you do it in the offseason, but I don't really see any obvious candidates jumping out there. And then MGH421 says, who will be the team's 4th leading receiver, assuming Kenny Johnson, Desmond Reed, and Raphael Williams will be the top 3? I tell you, there's some surging momentum for Blue Hicks, the transfer from Louisville. I think he's going to get an opportunity. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he was in the top 3 among the receivers, and maybe Raphael Williams is number 4. And if Williams is still number 3, then I think Hicks potentially could be number 4. I think he'll probably round out that rotation. I wouldn't be surprised if your starting 3 was Kenny Johnson, Raphael Williams, and Blue Hicks. They'll rotate other guys in, Sincere Lee and Deuce Spann, and maybe the freshmen, Tony Kinsler or Bryce Yates or Cam Sapp, some of those middle class guys like Zion Fowler-El and Tyreek Robinson. I mean, they've got different bodies to roll out there, but I think Blue Hicks could be in the starting lineup, and I think could end up being top 3 among the receivers and top 4 on the team, like you said, including Desmond Reed among the top receivers on the team this season. All right, great questions. We got to get out of here because it's training camp here on Friday morning, so we got to head down to the south side and start covering practice. Jim has taken the last couple. I'll be down there today. We'll have lots of coverage for you throughout the day today. Camp reports and videos and photos and interviews and all those different things. You can find it at Panther-Lair.com. So check it out, Panther-Lair.com. It's a place to get all your Pitt sports content and coverage. And then, of course, right here on YouTube, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Thanks for watching the videos all week. It's been a fun week. Training camp got started. We got some basketball stuff. We're going to have a good time with all of it at Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you stay tuned. Hope you've had a great week. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. And, folks, we'll be back with you on Monday here on YouTube. We'll have lots of confident content on Panther-Lair.com throughout the weekend. Either way, enjoy it. And we'll talk to you on Monday for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.